It was a quiet Sunday morning in rural Ireland when everything changed. In the home of Alan and Clodagh Hawe, a seemingly perfect family, an unspeakable tragedy was unfolding. By the time the day ended, 3 children, Liam, Niall, and Ryan, along with their mother, Clodagh, would be gone. The man responsible? Alan Hawe, a respected educator, a pillar of the community. But what drove a man with everything to lose to commit such an unimaginable act? And what secrets did he leave behind that would reveal the dark truth of that fateful day? Stay with me as we unravel the chilling events of the Hawe family massacre, a story that still haunts Ireland to this day. Alan Hawe, 40, was not just an educator. He was a cornerstone of his community in County Cavan, Ireland. As the deputy principal of Castlereagh National School, he commanded respect not only for his professionalism but for his ability to connect with his students and staff. His reputation was built on his quiet, reliable nature. He was a man of routine, always dependable, and deeply invested in his work. But more than that, Alan was seen as a family man, a devoted husband and father who seemingly had it all together. His life, in the eyes of his colleagues and neighbors, mirrored the stability of the community in which he lived. His wife, Clodagh Hawe, 39, was equally respected. A teacher at Orristown National School, Clodagh was known for her nurturing spirit. She was kind, compassionate, and genuinely invested in the lives of her students. Her colleagues often described her as a warm-hearted individual who thrived in the company of others, making friends easily and forming strong bonds with those around her. She balanced her professional life with grace and was always described as the heart of her family. Clodagh and Alan seemed to complement each other perfectly. Together, Alan and Clodagh raised 3 children: Liam, 13, Niall, 11, and Ryan, 6. Liam, the eldest, was intelligent and ambitious. He showed early promise in school, a bright and conscientious child who was eager to learn. Niall, at 11, was described as thoughtful and energetic, a boy who balanced his studies with a strong love for sports and the outdoors. Ryan, the youngest, at just 6 years old, was full of life, always curious, and adored by his older brothers. The family lived in a quiet, suburban home nestled in the peaceful town of Ballyghamesduff, where they were a fixture in the community. Their home, tucked away on a street in Oakdean Downs, was a symbol of tranquility. The town itself was small, close-knit, where people knew each other's names and looked out for one another. The Hawe family's life appeared to be perfect, an embodiment of everything that was good about rural Ireland. They were a picture of normalcy, of a hard-working couple raising their children with love, discipline, and care. At first glance, the Hawe family was everything people aspired to be. They were a loving, stable family with well-behaved children, successful careers, and a home that echoed warmth. Alan and Clodagh had built a life that many others would envy. Alan was a respected figure at his school, adored by his students and colleagues alike for his leadership and reliability. His meticulous nature made him the sort of person everyone could count on, whether it was solving a school issue or simply being there when someone needed support. Clodagh, too, was a respected professional, dedicated not only to her students but also to her family. To anyone who met her, it was clear that her children were the center of her world. For years, the couple's relationship seemed solid. They were the kind of couple who supported each other in their careers and in their roles as parents. They often attended school events together, enjoyed family vacations, and had friends they shared common interests with. There were no indications of anything out of the ordinary. But behind this veneer of perfection, there were whispers. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, some family members would recall that Alan had been distant. He seemed more withdrawn than usual, though no one could pinpoint why. Friends who spoke to him noted that he wasn't his usual self, but he didn't show signs of what would eventually unfold. Clodagh, on the other hand, remained largely unchanged, loving, dedicated, and deeply involved in her family and work. There were no public signs of marital strife or financial troubles, and no one suspected that there were issues of mental health. However, in private, Alan's mind seemed to be undergoing a shift. He began spending more time in isolation, pulling away from his wife and children. In the days before the tragedy, Clodagh's mother, Mary Call, spoke with Clodagh on the phone and had noticed nothing unusual in their conversations. Clodagh had no indication that anything was wrong. She planned to visit her mother the morning of August 29, 2016, like she had done many times before. It was to be a typical family day, until it wasn't. Despite the outward appearances of a family in perfect harmony, there were fractures beneath the surface. Some experts later speculated that Alan Hawe might have been dealing with personal demons, stress at work, family pressures, or even mental health struggles that had gone unnoticed by those closest to him. The lack of any overt signs left everyone around him blindsided by the horror that was about to unfold. The Hawe family, in the weeks leading up to that fateful Sunday, seemed to be living a normal life. They attended church, socialized with friends, and shared laughs over dinner. But as the day drew closer, Alan's actions began to suggest that something was quietly unraveling. And though no one could foresee the violent end that was approaching, there were small, subtle changes. A slight distance from Clodagh, moments of tension behind closed doors. Still, the public image of the Hawe family remained untarnished. Neighbors continued to greet Alan and Clodagh with smiles, and the school community praised Alan for his hard work and dedication. But behind the door of the Hawe home, something terrible was slowly building, hidden from the world. A tragedy that no one could have imagined was waiting to be set in motion. In the days before August 28, 2016, Alan's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He began spending more time away from home, retreating into his own thoughts. The peaceful, quiet family life would soon be torn apart by a devastating and shocking act, a tragedy that would change the lives of everyone who knew them forever. On August 28, 2016, the Hawe family went through what seemed to be a normal day, tucked away in their quiet home in County Cavan, Ireland. The picturesque surroundings, the peaceful countryside, the kind of place where nothing untoward was expected. Everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect. Alan Hawe, a 40-year-old deputy principal at Castlehan National School, was the kind of man who held a steady presence in the community. His wife, Clodagh, 39, was a beloved teacher at Orristown National School in County Meath, and together they had built a life that many would envy. Their 3 children, Liam, Niall, and Ryan, were bright and full of promise, each with their own budding dreams. But as the day went on, little did they know the calm before the storm was slowly slipping away. In the morning, like any other, Alan and Clodagh busied themselves with their responsibilities. The kids went about their typical school holiday activities, perhaps watching TV, playing outside, or preparing for the upcoming school year. There were no signs, no sudden shifts in mood, nothing that would suggest the horror that would unfold. On the surface, it looked like another mundane Sunday, with the promise of a new week ahead. But unbeknownst to them, this was the last day they would ever see the light of day. Clodagh spent the early part of the day preparing for the upcoming week of work. As a teacher, her routines were set: lesson plans, organizing school materials, and ensuring that everything was in place for the children's return. Clodagh had plans to visit her mother, Mary Call, in nearby Ballyjamesduff, a regular outing for Clodagh, who often stayed connected with her mother. Nothing seemed unusual, and she made the trip to her mother's home as she had done countless times before. At the same time, Alan remained at home with the children. He and Clodagh had been married for over a decade, and like many married couples, their lives were centered around family. The house was a familiar place of warmth and love. The boys, though still young, had their own personalities. Liam, the eldest at 13, full of youthful ambition. Niall, at 11, perhaps a little quieter and more reserved. But what was going on beneath the surface? Was there tension that no one saw? Was there something Alan had been hiding from those closest to him? No one could know. To the outside world, he was the ideal father, the upstanding community man, the devoted teacher. There were no red flags, no warning signs. As Clodagh spent time with her mother, the conversation was light and filled with family chatter. The two women spoke about the usual things: plans for the coming week, family updates, the kids, and perhaps a few trivial matters that mothers often share. Clodagh was in good spirits, unaware that her life and the lives of her children were about to be irrevocably shattered. The visit came to a close, and Clodagh prepared to return home. Her mother had no idea that it would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. The day's events didn't hold any particular weight. They seemed to follow the pattern of any other day. But Alan, back at the house with the children, had already set in motion a deadly plan that would change everything. As the evening descended upon the Hawe home, things took an unsettling turn. Alan, in a sudden and unexplained moment of clarity, or perhaps insanity, left a note for Clodagh's mother, Mary Call, The words scribbled hastily on a piece of paper were vague yet ominous. The note instructed Mary to contact the Gardaí if she noticed anything strange. It was a cryptic message, one that would not make sense until it was too late. There was no indication of what had happened, no clear explanation for why he had left the note at all. Yet, in that simple act, Alan Hawe had unknowingly dropped the first clue that would ultimately lead to the horrific discovery that followed. The rest of the night passed without alarm. Clodagh returned home to her family, greeted by Alan and their 3 children. What transpired in the hours that followed remains a chilling mystery to this day. Were there signs of distress from Alan? Did Clodagh suspect anything was wrong? Did the children, so innocent and unaware, sense the impending danger? No one can say for sure, but as the clock ticked into the early hours of August 29, 2016, the fateful decision had already been made. The morning of August 29th arrived, and Clodagh's mother, Mary, arrived at the Hawe residence. She noticed the note on the door and immediately became alarmed. With a sense of urgency, she contacted the police, who arrived at the home soon after. What they found inside was nothing short of horrifying. Clodagh and their 3 children, Liam, Niall, and Ryan, were dead. They had all been brutally murdered in a way that spoke of methodical intent, their throats slit with precision. There was no sign of a struggle, no clear motive other than the chillingly cold execution of their lives. Gardaí, arriving at the scene, found Alan Hawe upstairs in a bedroom, his life taken by his own hand. A tragic and devastating twist, it appeared that after killing his family, Alan had turned the weapon on himself, choosing to end his life in the same home where the horrific act had occurred. His body was discovered near his children's, his death sealed by his own hand, but leaving behind the aftermath of a massacre that no one could have foreseen. As word spread through the town, disbelief and confusion reigned. How could someone so well regarded, so seemingly normal, capable of such a gruesome crime? Those who knew Alan Hawe, his colleagues at the school, his friends, even his neighbors, were left in shock. Alan had always been seen as the dependable, reserved man. He was a teacher, a mentor, a man who had contributed to the community and appeared to have everything going for him. So how had it come to this? The Hawe family, once the picture of stability, was now nothing more than a grim reminder of how fragile even the most perfect-seeming lives could be. The police began their investigation, seeking to piece together the events leading up to that fateful day. They found that in the weeks and months prior to the massacre, there had been no outward signs of trouble. Alan had shown no extreme changes in behavior, and the family had not been involved in any legal or financial disputes. But as investigators dug deeper into his personal life and his final hours, they began to uncover unsettling details. Among the evidence found at the scene was a letter written by Alan before the killings that seemed disjointed, rambling, and apologetic. In it, he expressed remorse for his actions but offered little in terms of explanation. As the investigation continued, a sense of unease gripped those close to the Hawe family. What could have pushed Alan to kill his wife and children and then take his own life? Was it a personal issue, something buried deep within the family, or was there another, darker explanation for what had happened? The haunting questions seemed endless, and the answers were disturbingly elusive. The discovery of the bodies was only the beginning of a broader conversation about the nature of domestic violence, mental health struggles, and the sometimes unhidden emotional turmoil that people can face. Alan Hawe, once a man admired by his community, had left behind a family destroyed and a legacy marred by incomprehensible violence. Yet, the real story of what led him to commit such an atrocious act would remain buried in the silence of his final days. A silence that spoke volumes about the unseen struggles he had been facing. For those who knew them, the Hawe family's tragic end was a nightmare that would never be forgotten. For the community that had once praised Alan as a respected educator and father, the events of August 28, 2016 would haunt them for years to come. But the question remained, what truly happened inside that house? And was there anyone who could have seen the signs, perhaps preventing the unspeakable tragedy that would leave a family forever lost and a town grappling with the unimaginable? The truth, however, would remain elusive, and in the wake of the Hawe family massacre, the scars left behind would be carried by the community for generations. As investigators dug deeper into Alan's life, the signs of mental distress and personal turmoil began to surface. Colleagues from Castlehan National School, where Allen worked as a deputy principal, spoke of a man who had always kept to himself. He was friendly enough, but in the months leading up to the murders, there were whispers of personal troubles that might have been affecting his state of mind. Despite being a respected member of the community, Allen had withdrawn socially and began showing signs of increasing stress. Those who had worked alongside him noticed he seemed distant, even isolated at times. But no one could have imagined that these subtle signs would escalate into the tragedy that would shock the entire town. What was most perplexing was the apparent lack of any major warning signs. Allen had been a father to 3 children and a husband to Clodagh for nearly 2 decades, and by all outward appearances, their life together seemed stable. Clodagh was well-liked, a teacher who had a deep connection with her students. The family had their ups and downs, like any other, but there were no major red flags suggesting that Allen was capable of what he ultimately did. The horrific nature of the crime seemed to come out of nowhere, blindsiding those closest to him. Yet as more evidence came to light, a clearer, darker picture began to emerge. Gardaí discovered that in the weeks leading up to the killings, Allen had been researching topics online related to domestic violence, self-harm, and psychological distress. Searches like "how to kill someone" and "how to end your life" were found in his browser history. These disturbing searches painted a grim portrait of a man who was likely grappling with an overwhelming sense of hopelessness, though it remains unclear how these thoughts manifested into violence. Had Allen been planning this for months, or was this a sudden decision born out of an overwhelming emotional collapse? The investigation also found evidence of financial strain. Though not heavily reported in the media, there were hints that the Hawe family had been struggling financially. It's unclear how deep these financial problems ran, but it was suggested that they could have been a contributing factor in the unraveling of Allen's mental state. Was the pressure of providing for his family, coupled with possible feelings of inadequacy, the final breaking point? These are questions that remain unanswered, but they offer a possible glimpse into Allen's deteriorating mental condition. Yet even with all these discoveries, the question of why Allen Hawe would choose to murder his wife and children remained the most haunting of all. He left behind a fractured family, a devastated community, and countless unanswered questions. Was this truly the act of a man who simply snapped? Or was there a deeper, more premeditated reason behind the killings? Could Allen have been hiding something darker for years? Something that only came to the surface in that tragic moment? What is clear from the investigation is that Allen Hawe's life was not as perfect as it seemed. Beneath the surface, there were cracks that no one could see clearly until it was too late. The violence, the letter, the online searches, the isolation, it all pointed to a man in deep psychological turmoil. And as the investigation continued, the unsettling truth was that no one, not even those closest to him, could have predicted the horrors that would unfold on that August day. With the investigation offering no easy answers and the tragic finality of the murders, the Hawe family massacre remains one of Ireland's most haunting tragedies. A reminder that even the most seemingly perfect lives can be hiding devastating secrets. In the early hours following the discovery of the bodies, the media focused heavily on the shock of it all. How could a man like Allen, seemingly well-adjusted, kind, and even-tempered, commit such a heinous act? The first reports painted a tragic picture, a family torn apart, a man who snapped, driven by unseen pressures or mental health struggles. The idea of a respected family man committing murder was a story that, while unsettling, felt distant, almost like it belonged to another world. The media initially painted Allen Hawe as a victim of circumstances, someone who, under the weight of his personal troubles, had tragically lost control. His colleagues and even some of the parents from the school where he worked seemed to echo this sentiment, the image of a loving, responsible man who simply couldn't handle the mounting stresses of life was the version of Allen that many wanted to believe. But as the days went by, the full scale of the tragedy began to unravel. Investigators revealed more disturbing details. Allen had not just snapped. No, this had been a meticulously planned execution. Allen Hawe had executed the killings of his wife and children with chilling precision, leaving behind a cryptic letter, but offering no real explanation for his actions. The story began to shift as the truth emerged, and the image of the perfect family man started to crumble. Despite the mounting evidence that Allen had been planning the murders, some segments of the media continued to focus on his public image. They questioned whether this was the result of some kind of breakdown or unrecognized mental illness. The focus shifted toward understanding Alan. What could have driven him to such an extreme? The question on everyone's lips was, how could this have happened to someone who seemed like a good man? But as more details emerged about the family's life in the days leading up to the tragedy, this sympathetic portrayal began to seem increasingly out of place. Friends and family of Clodagh Hawe were furious at the way Alan was being treated in the media. Clodagh's relatives, who were left to mourn the horrific deaths of their daughter and grandchildren, felt as though Alan's crimes were being excused in the rush to understand him. To them, the story wasn't about a man who had snapped or suffered from a breakdown. This was the story of a cold, calculated killer who took the lives of an innocent woman and her children without any provocation. Women's rights groups and domestic violence advocates were among the first to call out the media for its failure to focus on the true victims of this story. They argued that the media's initial portrayal of Alan Hawe failed to acknowledge the silent dangers of domestic violence, which can often be hidden behind closed doors, masked by charm and respectability. These groups pointed out that too often, the focus is placed on understanding the perpetrator, his struggles, his pressures, while the victims, in this case Clodagh and her children, were left in the background, reduced to little more than names in a tragic story. This type of media coverage, they argued, further perpetuated the cycle of victim blaming and denial that often surrounds domestic violence cases. The backlash grew as more was revealed. For one, it emerged that Alan had been hiding a secret. His financial troubles were far worse than anyone had known. He had been living a double life, keeping up appearances while drowning in debt. The mounting pressure, combined with his inability to cope, might have contributed to his decision to carry out the murders. But again, these details weren't enough to excuse his actions, and yet some continued to focus on his so-called humanity. As the media coverage continued to unfold, some journalists even suggested that there might have been a trigger that pushed Alan over the edge, a final straw that caused him to lash out. This kind of framing, while offering a modicum of understanding to viewers, didn't account for the calculated nature of Alan's actions. He didn't simply lose control. He methodically took the lives of his wife and children and then turned the knife on himself. His final letter, found after the crime, was full of rambling apologies, but it provided little explanation for his actions. Yet the media at times continued to portray Alan as a man who simply couldn't take it anymore, despite the overwhelming evidence that this was a planned, deliberate act. For Clodagh's family and friends, this continued media narrative felt like a slap in the face. They fought hard to change the story, to demand that the real victims, Clodagh, Liam, Niall, and Ryan, be given the focus they deserved. Yet much of the public continued to view Alan Hawe as a tragic figure rather than a calculated killer. The public's fascination with the idea of a man who lost control continued to overshadow the reality of the massacre. The media, whether intentionally or not, had failed to portray the true scale of the tragedy, the destruction of a family, the loss of young lives, and the emotional devastation left in its wake. It wasn't until weeks later, when a more detailed investigation into Alan's financial situation and personal life came to light, that the true nature of the crime was fully revealed. The portrayal of Alan Hawe as a victim of his circumstances began to lose its power as more facts emerged, showing just how far removed his actions were from the image of a man pushed too far. But by then the damage had been done. The narrative of the good man who snapped had taken hold in the public consciousness, and it would take years for the story to be reframed properly. In the end, the media's handling of the Hawe family massacre would serve as a poignant reminder of the ways in which society often fails to see the true victims of domestic violence until it's too late. It also highlighted the dangers of romanticizing or excusing perpetrators, no matter how well-respected they may seem on the surface. Alan Hawe may have been a pillar of his community, but in the end, his actions showed the darkness that can exist beneath even the most ordinary of facades. Although the haunting memory of the Hawe family massacre may seem like a chapter closed in Ireland's tragic history, the echoes of that fateful day continue to reverberate as new details and developments emerge even years later. In 2019, a serious case review was launched to investigate not only the events leading up to the massacre, but also the entire handling of the case. The review was prompted by a growing concern among the public and Clodagh's family that crucial signs of distress or warning signals might have been overlooked by both authorities and those close to the Hawe family. Were there any clues that could have pointed to the impending tragedy? Could this have been prevented? These questions remained unanswered, despite the chilling nature of the crime and the devastation it caused. At the heart of the aftermath is Cloda's family, her parents and siblings, who have carried the weight of this tragedy with incredible resilience. But their battle didn't end with the loss of their loved ones. They've been embroiled in an ongoing legal struggle, fighting for access to documents that could unlock more about Alan Hawe's state of mind in the months leading up to the murders. What the family sought were records that might have shown Alan's private thoughts and his increasingly unsettling behavior. These documents would hold key answers to the lingering question of why. Eventually, some of these records were made public, offering a chilling glimpse into Alan Hawe's preparations. Researching violent acts online, even leaving behind a handwritten note before his actions, these fragments of his last days revealed a man deeply troubled, but still, no clear explanation surfaced. Despite the efforts to uncover more, Cloda's family found themselves not only battling the legal system, but also struggling with the emotional toll. They've criticized the lack of proper support provided to families impacted by such tragedies. Legal costs mounted, and they found themselves isolated as they tried to navigate the process, highlighting the broader issue of how little assistance is available for those who are left to pick up the pieces after a devastating loss like this. The Hawe family's story did not end when the headlines faded. In fact, the tragedy sparked wider conversations on domestic violence, mental health, and the hidden pressures that can unravel lives behind closed doors. Alan Hawe's shocking act brought attention to the need for a stronger response to mental health crises, especially in high-pressure professions like teaching. In a small town like Barconi where everyone knew each other, the tragedy left the community reeling and questioning how someone they thought they knew could commit such an unimaginable act. Local organizations began to push for more awareness and support systems, hoping to prevent something like this from happening again. And then, in 2024, a decision was made that would mark a final step in the public healing process. A memorial was proposed at the site of the Hawe family home. The house, once filled with the life and laughter of Cloda and her children, had stood as a grim reminder of the loss the community had suffered. The proposed memorial garden would transform this painful space into one of quiet reflection and remembrance. It's a symbolic gesture, one that honors the lives of Cloda, Liam, Niall, and Ryan, and creates a place where the community can pay their respects. Yet, for many, it doesn't fully close the chapter. It simply brings a new form of acknowledgement to a story that refuses to be forgotten. However, even with all these developments, the most difficult question still lingers. Why did Alan Hawe commit such a horrific act? What drove a man who was, by all outward appearances, a devoted husband and father, to murder his entire family and take his own life? The search for answers continues, even as the Hawe family's story remains one of sorrow, unanswered questions, and a lingering sense of grief that is still felt by those who knew them. As the years pass since that tragic day in 2016, the Hawe family massacre remains one of Ireland's darkest and most haunting cases. The mystery surrounding Alan Hawe's actions still lingers, leaving behind more questions than answers. What pushed a man who appeared to have everything to commit such an incomprehensible act of violence? Was there a history of abuse or a mental breakdown that had been hidden from view? The investigation uncovered some unsettling details, but the true motive remains unclear. What is certain, though, is the devastation left in the wake of this tragedy. Cloda's family, her community, and even Ireland as a whole were forever changed. The massacre forced a much-needed conversation about domestic violence, mental health, and the hidden struggles many face in silence. It's a tragic reminder of how little we may know about the people closest to us, and how unchecked pain can erupt into something unimaginable. In the end, the Hawe family's story is not just about loss. It's about the unseen dangers lurking in quiet places, the silence that can speak louder than words, and the vital need for support, understanding, and vigilance. A case like this is a grim but necessary reflection of the complexities of human behavior and the dark places it can lead. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out. No one should face their darkest days alone. If you were disturbed by the Hawe family tragedy, you're not alone. This case raises difficult questions about domestic violence, mental health, and the quiet horrors that can lurk behind closed doors. We want to hear your thoughts. What do you believe drove Alan Hawe to commit such an unthinkable act? Share your comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more in-depth investigations into the most shocking true crime stories.